What is going on, guys? Jack here, and welcome back to the LARNE Project Extra. Today is episode 14x, and well, we have just started our second season campaign, of course, our first season in the Premiership, and I feel like it's time just to have a bit of a sit down, talk about the summer transfer dealings that we did, obviously how the reserve team is shaping up, and some of my kind of general thoughts that kind of bubble away in the back of my mind, but I can't necessarily portray and talk about in a main episode without it becoming too rambly. So if you're not familiar with what these extra episodes are, it's essentially a chance for me just to sit down, nice chilled out discussion. I know some people love just to see the matches in Football Manager, whereas for others, you know, you love the nitty gritty, you love to just hear me talk. It's some kind of weird ASMR thing where it's just relaxing to have on in the background whilst you play your own games. But yes, obviously we've started the season pretty well. But in terms of the transfer business, it was a bit of a weird time. I talked about this a little bit at the end of last season. But essentially, I didn't expect us to qualify for the Europa League in the first season. Obviously, the only way we were ever going to do that was through the Irish Cup. As things worked out, we had a slightly easier run into the competition that saw us obviously win it in the end against Bangor in the final, which was just a bizarre way to do it. But with that happening, it kind of threw a bit of a spanner into the works because all the signings that I'd made in the first summer transfer window in the first year, obviously we made a lot of signings as well at that. They were kind of all players signed, not really thinking that I was ever going to be playing in Europe. And so as a result, when we got promoted, and of course we qualified for Europe, we were in a bit of a situation now where we had all these players who weren't quite good enough, and they kind of were just clogging up the whole team. I mean, when you look at the overall squad here, and if we just have, you know, all of our squads enabled, our squad is massive, like in terms of the sheer number of players we have, including loanees in and out. We have 127 players on our contracts. Now, obviously the under-18s makes up a chunk of that. Some of these players are players in the under-20s who are set to be available for the under-18s. Obviously you then got the under-20s, the reserve team as well, and of course the senior squad, which, to be honest, I'm pretty happy with the overall balance of the senior squad right now. We have 26 players. I talked about it, I think, in the last episode, but the only real concern I have right now is with the strikers, and that's simply down to the fact that David McDade and Stewart just, I don't think, are good enough. When you compare them to Simmons and O'Connor, who are kind of our front two scoring goals for fun, it's difficult to see how either of them can get into the team. And, well, in some ways, it's a good job that Glatzel's injured, of course, the German, British kind of dual nationality citizen, a player we signed from Liverpool. When you compare him to Simmons, they are slightly different players, but equally, they're two players who are pretty, you know, pretty much on even footing in terms of overall ability, and both could be competing for a spot. Of course, with McDade and Stewart both in their last year of their contracts, it does feel like this might be the last season for them unless they're really willing to either take a wage cut or lower their squad status. You can see they both have fairly professional personalities, so that's kind of useful to have. I have, you know, during our entire time here, been using the mentoring system and really trying to get good mentors into each area. It's not had that bigger an impact. Of course, Football Manager's tutoring has changed a lot this year, but it does feel like, to me, like players' personality just isn't as moldable as it once was. I did always feel like it was a little unrealistic in Football Manager that, you know, you'd send an 18-year-old away with a 31-year-old with a good personality, and within 2 months, suddenly the 18-year-old was like the world's best professional footballer in terms of his mentality off the pitch. It always felt a little bit odd to me. Of course, in real life, players, no matter how much tutoring you give them, sometimes they're just not going to come around to the idea of becoming a more professional footballer. And that's kind of represented in Football Manager now in general. So yes, overall we signed a lot of players, but it did kind of throw a spanner into the works in terms of, well, what I wanted to do this year. Obviously, you can see here we ended up making a fair amount of signings, and we've actually continued to make them. 33 new additions to the side. A lot of these were players playing for Premier League clubs who, well, didn't have contracts extended. I kind of narrowed down my search here by looking at players marked for release by, you know, the top Premier League clubs, and it kind of allowed me to really hone in on some pretty good players. And you can see that within the kind of opening transfer window, kind of opening date, we had already signed 16 players. The majority of these slotting straight into the reserve team for the most part, to be honest. They're all players who are 18, of course, or younger, which helps with the age ratings, but also with the homegrown player situation. Of course, longer term, I want to get the homegrown players, you know, in line with the aspire to inspire philosophy that the club kind of has. You can see right now, Within the reserve team, we've got lots of players who will get homegrown personality at club in the next few years. Some of them going to get it in the not so distant future. But all in all, there's a lot of exciting talent here. And while when you look at it in the first team, again, there are some players who are going to be getting homegrown at club sooner rather than later, which is always going to be useful. We have made a real kind of intentional decision, I guess, to sign a lot of players who are in their, 17s and 18s, because this is going to be important, especially with Europe on the horizon. We are going to have rules, where we have to have 4 homegrown players at club minimum in the starting 11 and, in the overall squad that we register. Of course, with my own club goals, one of the aims is in 7 years' time to have half the players at the club homegrown at the club itself, which, to be honest, we're not actually that far off. Assuming that these guys here, like Kieran Kane and co, will also get homegrown at club, which I'm not entirely sure if they will for certain. But we have potentially 13 players, but almost certainly, if we don't sell them, 9 players here in our squad of 26 who will be homegrown at club by 2022. So that's some good progress being made there. We have put a lot of emphasis on youth this year. When we got promoted, I didn't think I was going to let go of that many players. I felt like, the likes of Matt Claney, Devlin and co, players like Jeff Hughes as well, I'd be able to hold on to for a little bit longer, McDade and Stewart. I expected those to be our starting 11. But just given the way things have gone, given how some of them have just declined as footballers, Hughes is a great example of this. He just has fallen off a cliff. In our system, we play with such a mobile midfield, that ball-winning midfielder on support and a box-to-box midfielder. The ability to be able to get up and down the pitch is just essential for our overall system, and Jeff Hughes just doesn't fit into that now. At 34 years old, he actually still has another year left on his contract. That wasn't a contract that I offered him, I should point out, but I just don't see where he fits into the team longer term. Obviously, he's a good backup player to have. He's a good experienced head to have in the team. But kind of the harsh reality is the likes of Lions coming through. I just don't know how I can justify playing Hughes. I mean, when you compare them, Hughes slightly better in the air, maybe slightly better technically, but the mentals and physicals are just so much further in the way and in favour of Brad Lions that it's difficult not to play him. Over the course of this year, I'm hoping that Lions is going to continue to improve. We have actually noticed at national team level, a lot of scouts have been looking at our players. We've had Michael O'Neill repeatedly turning up to our games this year so far and having a look at what we've got on offer. When you look at the under-21s, there are 6 LARNE players in there, which is obviously fantastic to see. I think the notable inclusions are probably Paul O'Connor, to be honest, and also Kieran Kane in the starting 11. Daniel Ballard, of course, on loan from Arsenal, also features. But yes, I feel like Kane and O'Connor, in terms of our Northern Irish talent, they are the 2 players really to keep an eye on right now. But, as you look further down, you can see in the under-19s, we also have a few players here, 5 in fact, to be precise. There are other players here playing for various clubs, and to be honest, I should probably be scouting some of them. Players like Johnny Beattie, I'm keeping an eye on a player like this guy because he looks very good, but I don't know how he'd ever fit into our squad right now. I am conscious about over-hoarding players. Certainly this summer, with us signing a lot more players from Premier League clubs who were kind of, trainees who weren't kept on. It put me in a situation where all the players I'd signed last year for the under-20s who just now weren't good enough with European football as a real prospect needed to be put into the reserves, and as you can see, a lot of them have just been loaned out this year. For the most part, their wages are covered, which is a bit of a relief. For a player like Cole Stewart, he's a player who maybe has some potential still to be a useful squad player down the line, but right now he's on loan at Barrow in the National League North. And you can see here, he's done okay there, but the real saving grace is the fact that Barrow are just paying all of his contract for this year. £650, it's not a small amount of money really. And, the sad reality is he just isn't quite good enough. And that kind of goes for a lot of players in the reserve here. There are players like Liam Morris, who I think still has the potential to feature in the team. He was a player I was very excited about last year, but he's still just not really learning that wing-back position that we've been training him in. There are some clubs interested, and I have offered out a number of the players in this team, out to see if anyone's interested. On the other hand, I've tried to loan out players who I think might need first-team football to do well. The likes of Oddy are a good example of that. Players who I loaned out this year who were key for us last year And to be fair, you'll notice there have been a fair few players loaned out this season. It's a little bit unusual, I guess, for me to loan out players, particularly given the fact that some of these players who I loan out won't get homegrown status at club as a result. They will, for the most part, still get homegrown in nation because, well, for the most part, I think almost all of them have gone on loan to Northern Irish sides. But, for a player like Jimmy Stewart on loan at Cliftonville this year, he won't get homegrown status at club because he's going to be on loan. I mean, when you look at this guy, what a player this guy could be. I feel like of all the signings we made in the summer, he is perhaps the player to be most excited about. Yes, he's inconsistent, and that is a little bit of a concern because so many players in our squad have that. But when you look at his mentals and you look at his physicals, if he can improve technically as a footballer, which you'd say at the age of 18 he should definitely be intending to do, he could turn into a really tasty ball-winning midfielder for us. Signed for 16k, we've loaned him back to Cliftonville as part of the deal. And to be fair, Cliftonville have been a pretty good club for us to send players out on loan to. There's been a few players here who we've loaned out who I think do have futures in the first team. Players like, obviously, Lee King here has gone on loan to Glenavon. You can see he's been playing in the Champions League qualifiers, the Europa League qualifiers for them, even in the league occasionally. Although his performances haven't been amazing, he has continued to improve. And that's definitely something worth being excited about. I feel like for the most part, the players we've loaned out have done pretty well, with the exception of Hale Brown here, who, as you can see, has had a torn abdominal muscle. He has missed pretty much the entire of the season so far through that. He's had a few long-term injuries. At the start of last year, I saw this guy as one of the future goalkeepers for our team. I really felt like he could be the player to step in a couple of years' time and replace Devlin. Obviously, as things have transpired, that really hasn't been the case. It's a bit of an unfortunate situation with this guy because he has had just a few very long-term injuries. A fractured lower leg, was out for 3 months with that. They're going to be out for another 3 months with his current injury. And whilst he was one of those players I signed last year, who perhaps you could throw into the bracket of players who probably aren't going to be good enough, I did still have some hopes that a loan spell might bring out the best in him, and so for him to get another long-term injury really is a major setback. When you look at the rest of the reserve team, it has become a bit of a graveyard as well for players who were key players last year. Players like Martin Donnelly, I mean, I love this guy. I know he's a massive, massive player for LARNE in real life, but he just doesn't cut the mustard. Compared to some of the younger talent we've got, he just really isn't good enough. A player like Alex Evans as well. I love Alex Evans, and to be fair, he might be an okay squad player. But you look at our defensive options here, he is listed right down in terms of 14th best, obviously in the opinion of our assistant. But, well, when you look at the likes of Gary Marsh coming into the squad who was signed this year, obviously Ballard has joined us as well this year. We've got some pretty tasty centre-back options. And actually, when you start looking further down, you realise we've got a few other players worth being aware of. Players like McKeown here, who we signed from Everton when he was released. A player with some potential. He's not the best in the air. He's only ever going to be a covering defender. And his mentals are lacking. But he is only 18 years old. His birthday in a couple of days. But we've brought him in on a free, and it's a relatively low-risk transfer. One player who I've not really talked about yet, who I definitely think is worth just singing and screaming about, is this guy, Jamie McCoyd. He is, unfortunately, you can see here, another player listed as being inconsistent. But he is an absolutely tremendous centre-back. I don't really see him as a full-back because I don't think he's good enough going forward. But as a centre-back, he's only 17 years old. He was a player we signed from Ballymena last year, you can see, for £2,000. An absolute bargain, you'd have to say. And he looks like he could be a very good long-term player. But it's, the additions of players like McCoyd, obviously Tom Clayton has joined us this year, another player we signed from Liverpool. These trainees, they have potential. A lot of these are punts, but ultimately they are punts that are better than players who were squad players last year. For example, Alex Evans. Obviously, a guy like Tom Clayton as well, at least in the eyes of our assistant, is kind of on par with Graham Kelly. When you compare them, I'd say Kelly is the better player. However, Kelly is also 21. Clayton here is only, well, you can see, 17 years young, so loads of room for him to improve. And I think there's potential here. You look at players like Clayton and McKeown. They are two trainees who you look at and you can kind of see why they were let go of Everton and Liverpool. Why they just weren't kept on, because they're just not quite good enough for Premier League clubs. But we'll hoover them up. We'll give them a second home. Obviously, we're improving our facilities. Our coaching setup is very solid. And I'm hoping we can, build off that. I mean, when you look at our training coaches here, in terms of assignments, things are looking pretty solid at this point. We really have done well, I feel like. There has been a little bit of a turnover in coaching staff over the summer. For example, Doherty I did let go. Of course, a player who was a goalkeeper for us in our squad last year, retired from football, became a coach. In his place, we've got players like Arbeloa who have come in. Obviously, only 26. If we can continue to improve, players like Arbeloa, I think like it's a good investment. Obviously, he's someone who's very experienced at international level as a coach. If we can, send him on coaching trips, fund his development, I think he's going to be really beneficial for us. Of course, he kind of links up with Victor Valdez as one of the new additions. We've also got good coaches though, like Glenn Hand here. This guy, really low-key, kind of underrated player. Or rather coach, more of a head of youth development naturally, but as a coach playing the role that we need him to as, I believe, a fitness coach, he does an absolutely insane job for us, which is obviously something I'm not going to complain about one little bit. Obviously, Alex Gibbons as well, or Robert Gibson, another coach who just is superb for us. And for this level, he's a big improvement on what we had before. Our coaching staff this year really has increased in size, which has been nice. With us going up a division, the board have been pretty generous, all things considering. I talked about it before, but of course they did give us that £3.7 million sponsorship deal that they managed to pull out of thin air to help, circumvent financial fair play. We have £5.5 million in the bank. You look here, you can see our training and youth facilities really on the verge of being improved. Data analyst facilities have continually been improved over the last year. Really, we're in a really good spot right now, I feel like, for long-term success. I'm trying to set us up, and I feel like the foundations are being found. Once our facilities get upgraded here, I'm hopefully just going to request immediately for them to be upgraded again. I feel like given the money that we have in the bank right now, that's not, an unfair desire, I guess, to want to increase that budget further. But, to be honest, the board have given me everything that I could want this year. Obviously, the wage budget went up quite a lot. Our squad is massive, and there are definitely players who are overpaid. But, as is the nature of the beast, I feel like longer term we are set up, for real meaningful success. Obviously, I picked out a few names who we've already talked about, in terms of defenders and, players we signed this year. I feel like it's worth just looking through some of the hot prospects in our side. The players who have, at least in our assistant sides, the best potential. Adrian Crawford is a player we picked up during the summer. I absolutely love this guy. He is improving a lot as well. 16 years old, signed from Coleraine for £1,000. He looks tremendous. His physicals aren't the best. His pace is a little lacking. If he can become a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit better with his jumping, he's going to be a very, very good player for us. You can see I am currently training his quickness because that is something I'd like to improve. I think longer term we'll probably look to improve, not his endurance, his strength, which will help with his jumping reach and his strength, of course. This year, additional focusers have seen a little bit of a change in terms of how focused they can be. I always felt like it was a little bit odd that you could just set a focus on passing. Obviously, in real football, if you were to do drills that involve passing, it's probably also going to be helping out with your first touch and your vision. So, that addition has been really nice this year. Other players we've got here, obviously, we've got Phil Hill, or Lil, as we've been calling him. He's 16 years old. We signed him from Dulwich Hamlet. And to be honest, I found that the National League North and South have been real breeding grounds for us. Very frequently, I found myself looking through, the media best 11s here, just seeing if there's any regens worth talking about. There was a guy playing for Chester who I was looking at one point. I think it's Walker here. He's a really exciting player. You can see I'm scouting him at the moment. I think we found out we can approach him as compensation. But if you are managing, obviously, LARNE or any club in Northern Ireland, I definitely recommend checking out the National League. I've obviously continually found some pretty tasty players at this level throughout this series so far, even in just a season and a half. I feel like Little obviously fits that bill. He's a very exciting player who our coaches really like, and he has been improving a ton. If we just look at our transfer history, he was not the only addition from this level either. Michael Roberts, we signed from Boston United. This guy just tipped to have a lot of potential. I talked about it at the time of signing him, but I am from Boston originally. I used to go watch them quite a bit. So I always like to check up on them. And we came across Roberts, and we also came across Tim Williams here. Two players who, at least in the eyes of our coaches, have some pretty good potential. They've got to develop a long way to reach it, but hopes are high that they'll be able to come good for us. And of course, when you look at those guys, Jim Wood, obviously, who we've also signed from this tier, from Curzon Ashton, where we signed Mandanda from. There's definitely players here worth checking out. Continually have a hunt around, even if it's just a case of going for all the clubs in the conference and the National League North and South and just looking at their key players, their young prospects, scouting them and seeing what they have to offer. I feel like we've really proven there is good value there. I talked about, obviously, all the youngsters we brought in. I feel like it's worth running through some of the players we haven't really shown much love and care to. For example, Phoenix Patterson, a name that I don't think I've uttered yet, but I'm sure I will utter again in the future. I mean, his name is Blooming Phoenix. He's got absolutely incredible physicals for a winger. You can see we've loaned him to Glenavon. I'm hoping he's going to get a decent amount of first-team football there. He's a player who I think doesn't really fit our system right now. However, if we do decide to move to play wingers in the coming years, he could really fit into our squad. And I feel like that is certainly something I've got to weigh up doing, is going to a more winger-orientated system, or certainly playing with attacking midfielders on the left and right-hand side. We just have too much talent there not to make use of, I think, longer term. Mark McGuinness we picked up from Arsenal. Again, similarly to some of the other defenders I've already shown, I can kind of see why he wasn't offered an extension at a Premier League club. He definitely has a lot of improvement to do, I think, to become well-rounded enough for my kind of centre-back. But nevertheless, a relatively low-risk punt. He's 18 years old. He's Northern Irish. He joined us on a 4-year deal. At worst here, he developed into nothing of note and we let him go. Obviously, medium situation, I guess, is we can sell him on for some money to another Northern Irish league side, which obviously is great for the league to help improve the overall quality. Best case, he has, some kind of amazing breakout season and just improves a ton and turns out to be great for us. We signed a few Arsenal players, Daley Campbell as well. This guy's good. He's got great pace, great acceleration. His defensive kind of technicals really aren't that bad. His mentals are okay. Again, though, only 18, low risk. I feel like when you compare it to Neco Williams, you can kind of see why Neco has been, in the first team, whereas Daley Campbell here hasn't. But I feel like at the same time, both these, have potential to be in the first team longer term. Our under-20s really is flooded with this talent, of these Premier League players who just haven't been given another chance. You look at players like Brooklyn Lions Foster here, who we've actually let go to Crusaders on loan. This guy looks like he could be a great utility defender. He's, pretty good with both feet. This year, going to be playing in the Premiership for Crusaders. Would love to see him develop into a really good player for us. I feel like longer term, this guy could be that resource player on the bench. That player who's kind of plays both wing-back positions, very good at both of them. Can also slot in at centre-back if we need him to. I really like the look of him, and obviously great to get him in on a free transfer from Tottenham. I'm not going to complain about that one little bit. I do feel like this kind of approach of, looking at what the Premier League casts aside is definitely going to serve us well, and is something that we've got to do this year. Matthew Smith looks like he has some pretty good potential playing for Arsenal, pretty well-rounded mentals. Again, it's that low-risk transfer. You can see right now, we're training him to play roaming playmaker. I feel like his physicals could do with a little bit more improvement. His mentals are very well-rounded. Technically, as a roaming playmaker, they're not that far off. He's been performing very well in training. Also, you can see here, not got a focus on him right now. I might put it to, physicals just to help with his strength and stuff, although, of course, that will naturally improve as he gets older and he gets a little bit taller. But, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but all of these players kind of tick a few boxes for me. Low risk, definitely have a lot to offer. I think, actually, Reece Williams here is... with the exception of his inconsistency, the best centre-back we picked up, from Premier League sides this year. We've loaned him to Crusaders. Obviously, you might have noticed at this point, we're loaning a lot of players out this year, which obviously means they're not going to be homegrown at club, but I feel like it's really going to aid their development. And while Williams here, just a fantastic player, capped at under-19 level for England, great pace, good in the air, mentally and technically needs to improve a little. But he's got the makings here of a really good defender. His physicals are just superb across the board, to be honest. His mentals are not too shabby either. I'm hoping that regular first-team football for Crusaders is really going to see the best come out of him. You can see a 7.4 rating for him in 3 league games. He's performed pretty well. Anyway, I've talked about a lot of these players. The same kind of thing applies. We've got Gordon here, who was previously at Everton. Very good player, can play a variety of positions in the final third. Tom Clayton, we've already talked about him, signed from Liverpool in that centre-back position. We've got here Deli Bashiru, probably overpaid for this guy in terms of his contract. I didn't fully scout him. I took a bit of a punt on him. It may not have been worth it. Our scouts felt like he had a hell of a lot of potential. I'm just wondering if I've got a coach who has better judging ability and potential, who would be a better option here. to show you guys. But yeah, this guy was tipped to have a lot of potential. His physicals are not too shabby. He has got a lot of improvement to do. So we'll see what he can do, though. I definitely think he could become a kind of ball-winning midfielder for us in the future if his aggression could get a little bit better and maybe his strength a little stronger. He's only 18, but he's on a lot of money. A 5-year contract as well, so not an easy player to shift off the books if we need to. The last of the kind of Premier League trainees we signed is Ellis Sims, who I like. Again, signed from Everton, Polish under-21 international. Definitely has a lot to like about him. If he can improve technically, both his attacking ability and his technicals, he could be a very, very good poacher for us. And, well, I talked about the length of the contracts. You can see here, if we just look at contract length, a number of these players have signed on 5-year contracts, which, whilst I can understand that being viewed as a risk at a lot of clubs, I feel like given our financial situation, at the end of the day, it's kind of low risk with a lot of these guys. We've got them tied down for the next 5 years for a lot of them, which is absolutely fantastic. We can really make an assessment as they develop as to whether or not we want to try and sell them, if we want to try and bed them into the first team, maybe loan them out, try and shift them on to other Northern Irish sides to help them out. Of course, as we do, hopefully, progress in Europe, our overall profile is going to increase. And with that, I would like to, attract good young players and then, potentially offload some of the players who don't quite make the grade here at LARNE to other Northern Irish football clubs to really, benefit the whole, Northern Irish football ecosystem. I talked about some of the players with the big potential. I want to talk about a few more that we've not touched upon. Mark Holmes, we signed from Dergview last year. You might remember we actually loaned him back to them. He's done pretty well. Barry Lafferty looks like he could be a good player going forward into the future. Of course, we are overburdened with attacking midfielders and centre attacking mids in general, so it's kind of easy to lose them all in the crowd, but there are some very exciting players here. Sam Brown, a player with potential. He's got great physicals. His technical's kind of lacking. There's a lot of different types of players here, but I feel like the way you can really look at our under-20s is we have the Premier League players who haven't quite made it for whatever reason at Premier League clubs as trainees. They've been released. We're kind of giving them a second chance at some late development. We then have the Northern Irish talent, which has potential, at least in the eyes of my coaches and my scouts, but isn't quite there yet. And then, obviously, there's the kind of separate breed of player, which is the players who have very good current ability and hopefully are going to continue to improve. Obviously, a fair few of these players appear in the first team. The best of the best, Kieran Kane, Simmons, O'Connor, Mandanda. They're just so good that it'd be pointless having them in the under-20s because they can do a job for the first team. But you kind of look here, a lot of players with 3-star ratings, and I definitely feel like there's players here who in the next few years are going to break into the team. When you consider just how many players we've got here. I mean, if we just filter it to under-18s and reserves, and then, you look at the kind of star ratings here. If we just look at 4-star and above, which is perhaps a little bit generous, there's 28 players here, and there are, 7 or 8 players here with 5-star potential. Hopefully we can keep them locked down, and hopefully they can live up to that billing. I'm obviously always a little bit kind of cautiously optimistic because of our coaching, judging ability and potential. I don't want to get too carried away and start bigging up players too much. But there's definitely talent here. It's really going to be down to us to nurture it and give it regular first-team football. And so this year, one thing that I have done is I've really tried to build different squads as their own kind of teams that play our 3-5-2. And what I mean by that is you kind of look at the team here. The overall balance of the under-20s isn't too dissimilar to our senior team. There's perhaps a little bit of an imbalance when it comes to the number of defenders. But for the most part, this is a squad where everyone should be getting a little bit of game time. You can see there are players here who haven't quite made it, and I'm hoping that we can obviously give them game time. A number of these players are actually players who play the attacking midfielder wider positions, which obviously don't really fit into our systems. That's probably why they're not playing so much. Even in the reserves, you can see here, I've tried to kind of create a squad of players as I've been juggling players between the two sides. And yeah, it applies to the under-18s as well. Yes, here, there's perhaps a few more exceptions. I have a few under-20s players set to be available for this squad just to ensure they're getting consistent football. Worth noting, our under-18s and reserve teams still don't play in a competitive league of sorts. I don't know if they'll ever be added to the competitive Northern Irish kind of league system for reserves and under-20s. However, with our reserve team, LARNE Olympic, they are playing, as you can see here, in the Steels and Sun Cup. So it's going to be interesting to see how far they can go in that. Of course, Bangor won it last year. This was a competition we crashed out of, you might remember. Which was... Did we crash out of it last year? I'm now trying to remember. I want to double check that now because I'm now doubting myself. I feel like that was a different competition. It was the Steel and Sons Cup, actually. So our reserve team this year has done better than we did last year in this competition, but I'm kind of interested to see how they get on going forward. Of course, we consistently arrange friendly matches for them. You can see we did that last year through the year just to maintain match sharpness. Same in the under-18s as well when it comes to the fixtures. It is a bit of a shame that only our under-20s play competitive fixtures, but we've got to make the most of them. You can see just looking at the Development League thus far, we're kind of mopping the floor with it. That is to be expected. You can see some of the best performers here. Phil Hill, one of the top performers in terms of average rating. Also Roberts. So the two former National League North players really making their mark so far in the Development League. Obviously, I'm hoping that is going to continue to go on for them. You can see both Gordon and Sims, both former Evertonians, also up there on the goal-scoring charts, of course. They're a little bit too good for the under-20s in terms of their overall quality, but I don't want to loan out all of our players because I need to have players who are homegrown at club. And, well, as long as they keep developing, as long as they're training well, I'm not so concerned. Of course, I do have my various squad views. These are all available on the Steam Workshop. But I do keep a very close eye on training. You can see, whilst a few people are a little unhappy with training, the general thing is that players are performing pretty well. Within our kind of reserve team, you can see the majority of players, 27 of them, have above a 8 rating when it comes to their training rating for the week. And even those players who perhaps aren't performing so well or are out on loan, you can see here they are continuing to improve as well, which is great to see. I've always had loan spells be a bit hit and miss in FM for me personally. I've never been sure if they've been that beneficial. But it seems like at least here they are pretty good. Of course, our reserve team here kind of full of players who I'm kind of happy to let go if the right offers come in for them. I'm not so attached to them. I know that might break the heart of a few LARNE fans hearing me say that about Liam Hassan, but he's just not good enough, unfortunately. But you can see here, just looking across the ratings, the players who we'd want to be performing well in training are players like Matt Drury. You can see here actually the big standout performer. This guy I signed last season for £210. He's been blooming awful. One of those punts that just didn't quite work out, and I'm happy to sweep under the rug when it comes to the many punts we took last year. A few players haven't performed so well in training, mostly just unhappy players, so I'm not overly concerned about that. I haven't really talked about the training in the first team, but you can see here how it looks. There are players who are unhappy with training right now. I'm kind of trying to fix that, trying to juggle things around. But even a lot of the players who are unhappy with training are still putting in pretty good ratings and improving. And for a player like Kieran Kane, who's complaining about his training, he's continuing to improve, and his training is trying to make him better fit our system as a complete wing-back. Ultimately, he's kind of got to accept that he needs to get a little bit quicker, that he needs to be a bit more complete as a winger and as a wing-back for us to really fit in our system, and so he's got to grit his teeth and get on with it. And to be fair, so far he is doing that a lot for us. I haven't really done that much in the way of player trait training. That is definitely something that I should maybe pay a bit more attention to. I'm training Simmons to knock the ball past his opponent. 14 acceleration, or rather 14 pace and 15 acceleration, is just next level for this division. And I really feel like having the ability to knock the ball past the opponent is really going to abuse that in our team. So that's why we're doing that there. Of course, you are more than welcome just to pause the video, have a look through how I'm training different players here. If you want to know more about my general training setups, last year with Socio, I did some kind of academy episodes, they were called, where I kind of went through my training approach. It really hasn't changed since then. If that's something that you guys would maybe like to see in the next LARNE Project Extra, exactly how I break down training, I'm more than happy to do that. When it comes to schedules, to be honest, I mostly just stick with the one that suits our tactical style. I don't really have any complaints about that. It's an element of FM this year I've not delved too far into. I feel like when you look at the likes of Paul O'Connor and how they're developing, it's not something we necessarily need to concern ourselves with too much. Anyway, I've rambled for a good 30 minutes here. I did tweet out prior to recording this, what would people like to see covered? What is the stuff you'd like to see in these LARNE Project Extra videos? If you've gone to the end point here and there's something that you really wish I'd covered, maybe I can cover next time, something that's desperately missing from these videos, please do let me know what it is down in the comments. These are obviously always meant to be slightly unscripted, a bit rambly kind of videos. You guys seem to love this kind of stuff. It's definitely an acquired taste and not for everyone, but those of you who love it, I could completely understand because it's the kind of content I enjoy too. But yeah, I think that's all from me today, guys. I've rambled on for long enough. Hopefully you've enjoyed the LARNE Project Extra here. If you have, do leave a like on it. It lets me know that you guys do appreciate the effort that goes into these slightly longer videos. You know, they do take a bit of a chunk of time. Of course, all my videos take a while. It's sometimes difficult to find 25 minutes in a day around work and stuff to just sit down and record. With these, I sometimes like to take a little bit of a note before I start, you know, jot down a few things. I didn't actually do that today, but maybe we should do that next time, especially if there's stuff that I miss out that you guys desperately want to see. As I said, you know, let me know what that stuff might be down below in the comments. And well, that is going to be all from me today, guys. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you have enjoyed. I will see you next time. It is me, Jack, and I will talk to you guys in a bit. I'm out.